Oh, well, hello. Welcome to the Homeless Consultant channel. This is Paul B. I am the Homeless Consultant. And since we have the stay-at-home order here in Minnesota and I'm not allowed to work for a living, I thought I would try my hand at, what do you call it, sculpting. So I took a bar of soap and my handy-dandy Swiss Army knife and carving out this beautiful model here. And, I don't know, can you see that? You know, the interesting thing is, a couple minutes ago, this woman came by. She was dressed in scrubs, you know, like a doctor or a nurse or epidemiologist or something like that. And she just said, "Hey, what you doing?" And I was kind of like, well, duh, you know, but, you know, I was nice about it. But, you know, I said, well, of course, I'm sitting here carving a model of my car. Duh. You know, I mean, since I live in the car, I might as well make something to remember it by. And the strange thing was, this woman, this doctor, you know, expert, she says, well, that doesn't look so much like a car as it does like a person, though. Let me see if you can... Really? She said that looks more like a model of a person than a car, and I was like, what? I mean, I don't... You know, I talk about experts all the time, and this is exactly the kind of thing I'm getting at. I mean, how many years of school do you have to go to figure out that people are not green? Actually, my car isn't green either, but, I mean, it's close enough. It's blue. Blue, green, you know, they're sort of, kind of at the same end of the spectrum, sort of, kind of. Anyway, the thing is, you know, if this was a person, how in the world would I carve out all of the bones and the skeleton? How would I carve out, you know, the tongue and the eyes and the eyebrows? How would I carve out all those nerves? And what about, you know, there's hundreds of organs in here. The heart, the lungs, the intestines, the spleen, the thymus. What about the brain, you know, the hippocampus and all these things in the body I'd have to be carving out here. And then, you know, I mean, if it's going to be a really good model, I would have to go down to the level of DNA and start carving out, you know, there's 6-foot strand of DNA in every single cell in our body. I mean, I'd have to... She's crazy. I mean, obviously this isn't a carving of a person. I mean, that's impossible. You can't do it. There's too much data needed to do something like that. There's too much that I would have to... I mean, granted, the car has some systems in it, too. It has a brake system and a steering system and a fuel system and suspension, and, you know, but it's not nearly as complicated as a human. Not even close. Not even in the same universe. Cars are something that we created, but we were created by God. And God made us infinitely more complex than these vehicles. So that's why I started out by carving a car. Now, I'll admit I'm not the best sculptor in the world. In fact, I'm pretty bad at it. But I'm kind of proud of this. I've just got a bunch of soap shavings here to find something to do with. You know, the reason I mention all this, the reason I bring this up at all, is because with the stay-at-home order, it is instigated by our fearless leader, Tim Waltz. He is following the experts, the epidemiologists, and the experts are coming up with their commands, commanding him what to do, based on computer models. So I thought it might be a good time to finally take a look at what models actually are, because you're hearing this in the news all the time, and wow, it sure does sound impressive, doesn't it? Computer model. Ooh. So I'm going to do one or two, probably two videos on models. The first one here, I think I'm going to talk about just what is a model, and it's going to be more of a discussion, just kind of a bunch of ideas, things to think about to help you get the frame of mind. In the second video, I'm going to talk about computer models specifically. Once you understand what a model is and what it does, what its limitations are, then you're going to be in a much better position when I explain what a computer model is to recognize that these experts don't have the slightest idea what they're doing. And the only person who knows less what they're doing are the governors who are following these people blindly without researching anything first. I have another model here for you. How about this one? Little guitar. It's kind of hard to play. Go! Go, Johnny, go, go! Go, Johnny, go, go! You know, the question is this thing a toy? Or is this a model of a guitar? Or is it a guitar? I mean, if you look at it, it has a body. It has the upper and the lower bout. It has the bridge. It has a sound hole. So it has the acoustic chamber inside. It is hollow. It has a neck with all the frets on it. It has strings. It has the headstock. It has tuners. The only thing it really doesn't have, and many acoustic guitars don't have that anyway, are the strap holder. Otherwise, this is a guitar. It's just a really, really crappy guitar. It's an unusable, ridiculous, silly guitar. And that's why we classify it as a toy. But is this a model of a guitar? We're going to find out later, but I'll let you know, I don't think this is a model of a guitar because it is a guitar. It has all the components of a guitar. It does what a guitar is supposed to do. It's just built very poorly, so it doesn't do it well at all. But most people would look at this and hang it on their wall and say, well, yeah, that's a model of a guitar. You know, like when you make a model of a ship, you put it together, maybe the ship inside the bottle, it's a model of the ship. Although, if it's a model of the ship, how often do you see a tall ship sailing across the ocean blue inside of a gigantic bottle? You know what? It's really, really, really cold, and my hands are just frozen to the point where I can't carve anymore. So I'm going to bring the camera inside to my home here. Let's talk about models, shall we? Okay, welcome back. So what I'm going to do in this particular video is I'm basically just going to talk about models. And it's a bit of stream of consciousness here, which is really strange for me to do. I usually plan things out. I do have some notes, but I want to see where this goes, because what I'm trying to do is make you think about what a model actually is. Because you're hearing this word all the time, and I have to wonder, are people really thinking about what it is they're being told? Or when you hear the word model, do you just think of Kathy Ireland or some supermodel? Or do you think of a model of a ship like I was saying before? What do you think of when you think of the word model? Just throwing the word computer in front of that to get computer model. If you don't know what a model is, then what in the world is a computer model? And why are you trusting your life to it? And why is our governor willing to hurt a lot of people for it? So to start out, model, I don't have a dictionary in front of me. I don't have access to the internet, so I don't know what the dictionary definition of model is. But in terms of what's going to become a computer model, a model would be something like, some people would probably still consider this thing a model. And I guess in a sense it is, but it really is a guitar. It has all the components. It functions as a guitar. Even the boat, when you create the little boat and all that, technically, as long as it floats, if you put it out there and it floats, might even have a rudder and the sails might, if it's radio controlled, for example, boat, you could move the sails, you can move the rudder, and you can sail the boat. Well, is it a model or is it a boat? It is a boat. The thing with a model is that ultimately the purpose of the model is to represent something. It's a representation or an abstraction of something that is either real or imagined. So in other words, it's kind of how you look at it. It's your part of what a model is based on your own perception, and that's very crucial. Based on your perception. Their perception may be different. Their perception may be different. Like I said, a lot of people would consider this a model of a guitar. Now, while I may say that technically to me it's a guitar, it's a horrible guitar. So if someone calls it a model, it doesn't hurt me at all. I don't really care. But if someone took a really nice guitar that I have and they called that a model, I'd probably be offended. This is a really nice guitar. How dare you call this a model? Well, a model is supposed to be inferior to the real thing, right? It's not that it's supposed to be, but it has to be because it's a representation of the real thing. If it's a sailboat model, then it's an inferior version of the real thing. If only because it's so small that you can't get on it and go sailing. But it can also be an abstraction, a model. And when you're dealing with that, you're dealing with things more like mathematical models. We're going to talk about that more in part 2 of this video. But I just wanted to mention that a model can also be an abstraction, an abstract representation of something. What about this, though? I said a model is a representation of something that is real or imagined. Okay, the boat is real. A guitar is real. When I was young, I went to the store and I bought this box, and I put together a model, a scale, 2-scale model of the starship USS Enterprise from Star Trek. It looked just like it, just a lot smaller. Alright, now the thing was, this USS Enterprise never existed in the real world, and even to this day, probably 40 years later, it still doesn't exist in the real world. And even if you took the Starship Enterprise that I had and you added radio control to it so it could fly, it still is not going to go warp speed. Period. It isn't going to do it. You know what? In this thing, even the transporter didn't even work in this thing. Okay, so the question is that a good model or is that a bad model? I mean, it can't go warp speed. The transporter doesn't work. It's too small for you to fit into it. Is it a good model? Is it a bad model? Well, most people, including myself, would say it was a very good model. It looked exactly like the Starship Enterprise on Star Trek. Didn't do anything at all. So why was it a good model? The reason is because when you're trying to represent something like that, it isn't functional. When you're trying to represent something like that, the main thing it's trying to do is it takes your imagination on a journey. Even these supermodels that you look at out there, you look at these women who are all made up and everything, that's what they're doing. They're taking your imagination on a journey. If you're a guy, you're going on one journey with this supermodel in your mind. If you're a girl, you're going on another journey. Right? But the person isn't real. They have to cake on all that makeup and probably have Photoshop and all manner of weird stuff going on to get those photos the way that you see them. But they're a model. So the point with models is you're trying to create a representation or an abstraction of something. Now, in most cases, you're doing it for the purposes of imagination. In the age of mathematics, as science improved, as mathematics improved, the concept of representing something else began to become much more functional, or you might say useful. Practically useful versus this imagination kind of thing. And that's what my Starship Enterprise did not have. It just didn't have. It doesn't have a transporter, it doesn't have warp drive, it doesn't even have the photon torpedoes. It doesn't have anything. It's just a piece of plastic that I glued together. That's all it was. But as they started, let's go back to, let's say here, I put in World War II. The code breakers, okay? Germany had the Enigma code, and the Enigma code was basically impossible to break. It was a machine that had all these gears and things in it. They had to all be aligned properly. They had a code book, and you had to use those codes to enter in to get the machine to go where it needed to go so you could interpret what the code was. And if they changed the code book, then even with the same machine, or you could change the number of gears in the machine even. I mean, it was extremely difficult to break, and the only reason we broke it is because we basically stole one. I think it was a submarine that sank, and we managed to get one off of that sub before it sank. And the Germans thought it was absolutely unbreakable, and by all rights, it probably should have been. So they just went on using Enigma, and we're sitting there listening to everything they're saying. We did something similar with the Japanese. We had broken the Japanese codes pretty early, so we knew what was going on. We knew what they were up to. And they didn't know that, and that gave us the advantage. Well, at that time in World War II, they didn't have computers in any meaningful sense. They had the univacs, these big things that were a room full of vacuum tubes, 1,200 degrees. At best, you put a punch card in, you might get something back to you with a few more punches on it. The way these codes were broken were just sheer intellectual brute force. They took a bunch of very, very smart people, they put them in a room with paper and a pencil, and they went to work. And they used things like mathematics, linguistics, theory of encryption. And they had knowledge of these things, and they would try to break the codes, and they were very successful. The Americans were very successful, the British were very successful with it. Now let's take it another level then. Let's say that after World War II, as we approach Vietnam or something, now you're starting to get computers. And of course, when you get into the 70s, you really start to get the more transistorized computers, smaller, more useful, better interfaces. Instead of punch cards, you have keyboards and monitors that display things. When you get to that point, if you're going to have the computer do what those people were doing in those rooms, breaking the codes, then what is the computer doing? The computer is essentially modeling what those people did. It's an abstraction. The computer is an abstraction. The computer itself exists in the real world, but the software, the program that it's running is abstract. It doesn't exist in the real world. The disk or the chip that you plug into the computer to load the program exists in the real world, but the program itself doesn't exist. It's an abstraction. That's what's called software versus hardware. Okay, so when you have that software that's trying to do what those code breakers did, you could say that it is a model. But what is it a model of? Is it a model of the encryption codes? No. It's a model of the human beings who were trying to break the codes. Okay, so if you're going to do that, you're going to have to program things into the computer such as mathematics, theory of encryption, and linguistics. Now, there's a lot of other things you can do too, but I'm taking it like back to the 70s. I'm saying when you first had computers that were capable of even approximating, for you to program it to kind of sort of do what those brilliant people did in those rooms, what the computer was doing essentially was modeling the human beings in there. But you know what? Even at their very best, the only thing the computer could do at best was maybe break a code every once in a while. So to say that it's modeling the people, the human beings in there, isn't really accurate, is it? People are a whole lot more than someone sitting in a room breaking codes. But that's the only thing that software can do. In theory, a person could calculate the value of pi out to 1,000,000 decimal places, if they wanted to. Okay, 3.141. You could go on forever with that. That's what humans are capable of. But in the real world, what they're able to do is a lot less. And the main reason is because they're limited by time. Humans are going to die, for example. They're going to die long before they've had enough time to calculate pi out to 1,000,000 decimal places. Now, if you take a computer, though, and you have a computer do the same thing, basically 22 divided by 7, we know what pi is, right? If you calculate that out with a computer, it will give you the answer of pi to a million decimal places in less time than it took for me to say the sentence that I'm ending right now. See, the humans, they go on through their whole lives, get married, have children, grow old, and they're still trying to get out to a million digits by hand. The computer's done before I'm even finished telling you that it's done. It's that fast. Now, does that mean the computer's smarter than humans? Not by a long shot. Not by a long shot. It just means it's faster at some things. So, let me ask a question here. When computers became widely available, like the kind of computer I have here, which is light years beyond what I had when I was a kid, for example, or in the 70s, did they actually improve our ability to crack codes, for example, to do something that requires some, what you might call thinking? You know, did the computers just do the same thing that the people did in those rooms, or did a modern computer, introduce some kind of a brand new capability that humans just don't have? And the fact is, that's kind of a loaded question, to be honest, because of what I just said a moment ago. You know, the people have what they're capable of doing in theory, and then they have what they're able to accomplish in reality. In theory, they can calculate pi to a million decimal places. In reality, they just don't have enough time, if nothing else. Also, they're probably going to get bored doing it. But the computer doesn't have those restrictions. But it's very limited in what it can do. That's the trade-off. So, the computer can really only do what human beings do. It just does it really, really fast. Now, given the power of computers today, they are able to do things that when I say that in theory a human could do these things, it may be true, but you're really starting to stretch the boundaries of credulity there, right? It's, for example, you know, doing some kind of image processing or pattern recognition, doing things where you're splitting a photograph into the spectrum and viewing it in all ultraviolet. You're viewing an object in ultraviolet and microwave and all these, and you're putting all this together. Yeah, a human might be able to do that, or humans could do that, but it would take forever. Again, the time becomes the factor. But there isn't a whole lot a computer can do that a human brain can't, in theory, do. And it's not necessarily because computers are so limited, it's because the human brain is so amazing. The human body is so amazing. People don't not give it enough credit. So if you're going to go by like the standard definition of a model, in the sense of a representation or an abstraction of something that exists in the real world or in our imagination, then the computer is more or less modeling the human mind when it attacks these problems that people could do, but they don't want to take the time to do. And, you know, who can blame them? The computer is modeling the human mind, but the thing is, how good of a model is that? If the computer can calculate pi to a million decimal places, if the computer can more or less crack codes within minutes that would have taken maybe months for a room full of people, the computer might be modeling human activity, but is it really a good model of a human? I mean, for example, does the computer know how to love a fellow computer? Is the computer capable of lusting after another fellow computer? Is a computer capable of successfully entering a marriage, a union of two people who become one, and learning what it takes to get along and to make that partnership work throughout decades and decades of a lifetime, including giving birth to children and raising them to be good people of good character? Can a computer do that? I mean, the computer is modeling the human mind, right? It's modeling people. Well, obviously, it can't do anything that even comes near that. It's in a that humbles the computer right there. The computer might stand up and go, "Look at me, I can calculate pi." But once you bring up these other things that make human beings human, the computer just runs away in shame. You can't go near it. You can't touch it. And I know what you're saying. You're thinking, hey, Paul, haven't you ever heard of this little thing called artificial intelligence? Well, I actually have heard of it. When I went to graduate school, that is exactly was the emphasis I was going for in computer science, artificial intelligence. Now, let me tell you a bit about that. I moved 1,000 miles to go to the university for graduate school. When I got there, I found out that the computer science department was collapsing from within because of faculty infighting amongst themselves. Nobody at the university, not the administrators, not the admissions people, not the student loan people, nobody actually bothered to tell any of us coming in as new graduate students that year about this. We just had to show up and then find that out. Okay, so here's the question. Can a computer with artificial intelligence, is it capable of making a decision whether to tell the truth or to withhold that kind of important information, based on things like its own morality or its own definition of self-interest or its own empathy and compassion for others, its own sense of justice, right and wrong? Is a computer able to do that? How do you model a computer to do what this university did to me? To bring all of us in, thousands of miles moving, everything we have moving in to go to a school, only to find out that the department we're in is falling apart because it basically infighting within the cult is what it was, cult of academia. Well, how's artificial intelligence can do one thing or another, but how does it make the decision to do that? Because it doesn't have any concept of what morality or right and wrong is other than a checklist. This is right, this is wrong. Let me take a look at it and analyze it and see. Well, it looks like it leans a little heavy toward wrong. I'm going to call this one wrong. But does it understand all the nuances of what right and wrong are? When I went to the university, I went there to that university to study with one of the biggest names in artificial intelligence. Very well known. When I got there, I learned the hard way that he does not even teach classes. The university gave him $1 million research lab, and he just sat there and did research. Basically making money for the university, bringing prestige to the university, which helps increase their endowment, which is money. He had graduate teaching assistants teaching his classes. You got to understand, I moved 1,000 miles to study with this guy. I did not even meet him until 6 years later. The first time I met him was at a Halloween party 3 years after I left graduate school. So tell me, if you have an artificially intelligent computer, is it going to be capable of navigating the political and social rules to, is it going to be able to manipulate human beings in such a way as to run a scam like this guy did, or like the university did? Is a computer artificially intelligent really going to be able to do that? No, not a chance. The thing is, people are throwing out these phrases, artificial intelligence. They put out movies in Hollywood that make these computers look like they're brilliant. These computers cannot and never will get anywhere near what it takes to just be an ordinary human being and successfully navigate life. The computer is not alive. In the end, the only thing the computer is doing is the same thing it did back when it calculated pi. Some human being gave it a bunch of rules. It follows the rules at extremely high speed. And because it moves so much faster, or it seems to in many cases, than we do, although frankly, we in many ways think much faster than a computer. But in terms of grinding out,
mathematical equations and things, obviously a computer is much, much faster. So we get blinded by these things and we think that they're capable of doing things that they cannot do. But for all these people talking about transhumanism and everything, there's no way it's ever going to get to the point where a computer can simulate a human. They could replace humans. They could replace humans with something that isn't human, something that's just incredibly pathetic and lame, Mr. Roboto kind of thing. It can try to have emotions. You can build a robot where the mouth moves and it looks like a human, and it moves around like a human, and it does strange things like a human. But it's not human. It's never going to have all these things that we deal with from the time we're born till the time we die. And we learn from it differently based on our own experiences. Computers will never have that capability. What we have up here is so vastly superior to what's in a computer. What we have in our body is so vastly superior. DNA is a code that no computer could even come near. You don't hear about computers breaking the code on DNA. They can do a lot of processing of DNA, but you can't just plug a DNA sequence into a computer and the computer comes back and says, oh, that 90% of junk DNA out there, here's what it does. These over here control, whether your hair is going to stop growing or not. This one over here controls this, that, and the other thing. This is what makes you not a chimpanzee. Computer can't do that because it can't think. Artificial intelligence is one of the worst misnomers ever. It's a fascinating subject. It can be very useful in a practical sense. It can get a lot of things done that we can't do or don't want to do. But for us to think that somehow this is going to replace human intelligence is absolutely ludicrous. Now, if you can't replace artificial intelligence with a computer, and I don't just mean now, I mean ever. It isn't possible for it to have what the human being has. And personally, I think it's because humans are imbued with a spirit. We were created. If you believe in evolution, you think the dust came alive and turned into this and that and the other thing, and here we are. Well, if that's what you're going to believe in, look at my junk science videos, you're probably going to fall for something like artificial intelligence or transhumanism quite easily, because you think everything is just a bunch of processes. You don't understand, and a lot of those people, they're not exactly the best at navigating life in that way. They're not the most thoughtful people. They might sound like it because they go on a TED Talk and they're like, well, I believe that, one day humans will be able to, they can put on that show all they want to, but that's just like the model that you see in the photograph in the magazine. Looks beautiful, but what you don't see is all the makeup. You don't see the photographer's skill. You don't see the photoshopping going on to fix all the flaws. You just see the TED Talk. But that person's probably one of the more incompetent ones out there in the world. The fact that they're trying to even pursue something like transhumanism rather than experiencing what life actually is right now with other people, which is what life's all about, it isn't enough for them. They're clearly not engaging what it means to be a human being, right? That's why they're seeking something else. They want something more. Because we've got far more than several lifetimes worth of really fun, cool stuff we can do with just what we have right now. You'll never exhaust it if you try, if you get away from the television set and stuff. So AI is nonsense. It's just baloney. And I went there to study it. Now, in terms of the mathematics and the computer programming behind it, the logic behind it, I think it's fascinating. It really is. I still believe that to this day. But it's artificial intelligence. It's not the real thing. Now, that's just artificial intelligence, okay? When it comes to computer modeling, it's a whole different scene. The AI can be part of it, and that's why I wanted to touch on AI right now, because if you get into a computer model where they claim to inject artificial intelligence into it, you got to get the stars out of your eyes, Don't let them blind you with science. Okay? Artificial intelligence is just basically a bunch of rules and regulations and that a computer follows. Depending on how complex it is, it might make the computer kind of veer off in this direction this time and that direction that time, giving the appearance of some kind of independence or autonomy, or what you might call a unique spirit. But that's not what it is. It's just following rules. It's doing exactly what these evolutionists believe the world is, which is just following a bunch of rules, natural processes, one after another. There's no free will. There's no being. There's no self. There's no unique identity that transcends this world and carries on after we're dead. And ultimately, it's going to come down to that. If people want to believe in that kind of thing, that it's just a bunch of random processes, or we can step in and try to organize those processes so they're not so random. But either way, it's just a series of processes. If those people are going to be in charge of everything, you're going to get this kind of sterile, dehumanizing, just awful, awful stuff that they call science, artificial intelligence. And what you're going to find when I talk about computer models is that that's exactly what you have. You have these people who are attributing all of those things to their models of various things, including the spread of disease. Well, if they're going to do that, remember one of the rules of junk science I gave you is that junk scientists lie. They don't have any moral qualms about lying. If you're just nothing more than dust that came to life and became a monkey and then became you, there is no moral standard to prevent you from lying. Lying doesn't, there's nothing to feel guilty about, nothing to feel ashamed of. You didn't do anything wrong. Although, ironically, if you just came from the dust and our lives have no meaning and when you die, that's it, nothing else, then if a whole bunch of people die in a pandemic, it really doesn't matter anyway, does it? Because they just went into the bit bucket and ceased to exist, just like all of us will eventually anyway. So what's the big deal? That's the interesting thing about these junk scientists. There's no rhyme or reason to the way they think. So, anyway, that's just kind of a stream of consciousness discussion of what models are. Representations, basically, or abstractions. When you get into mathematics, you're dealing with abstractions. When you get into software, it's abstraction. But you're modeling something in the real world. And when I get into part 2 of this, I'm going to give specific examples. Hello, hello. As so often happens while editing this, I thought of a couple other things. I can see why I don't do stream of consciousness very often, at least without detailed notes. But I think I did make my point okay. But I thought of 2 other things that are worth considering as well. One of them is what's called the Turing test. And at least back when I was in school, the late 80s, early 90s, in college, the goal of artificial intelligence was to pass the Turing test. And what the Turing test basically was if a computer replaces a human, will other people be able to notice the difference? And at the time, of course, you couldn't do a whole lot with computers. So imagine that you have a computer network and a wall, and there's someone at a computer on one side, on the other, and the human starts chatting, just like you would today, over chat. You start chatting with somebody, and it responds, or they respond, and you start up a conversation. You start discussing things, and it's going to go wherever it goes, just like when humans chat. The question is, will the person over here be able to tell whether or not they're chatting with a computer or with a human? And that was the Turing test. That was the big test. That was the big threshold that artificial intelligence was aiming for at that time. Now, here's the trick. And I didn't get into this in the video because it sounds... How do I put this? It sounds like I'm insulting people, and it's always going to sound like that, especially when I use words like stupidity. But stupidity has a definition. It has a real academic definition. And stupidity, ignorance is when you lack information. There's things you don't know. You're ignorant. Stupidity means that the rules of logic and processing information and cleansing data, they don't work in your brain. You're just not doing it. That's what makes you stupid. It means that you're following rules of thumb. You're following these heuristics. Oh, they're black, therefore they're inferior to me. That kind of thing. That's called a heuristic. Now, if your brain is working properly and all those rules and everything that allows you to interpret the world in a way that's consistent with reality, if that's all working properly, you'll look at them and say, oh, they have darker skin than I do. Get over here, brother. Let's go have some food. And that's where things like racism come from, is from stupidity. That's where anti-Semitism comes from. That's where sexism comes from. And yes, that's where ostetophobia, the hatred of the homeless, comes from. Comes from stupidity. People are not thinking properly. And that is stupidity. And it's not that I'm using the word to insult people. It is the accurate description of what they're doing. Now, you could be a, quote, brilliant PhD researcher at a university. You could end up being the person who cures cancer. But in other areas of your life, you could be really, really stupid. I saw it at this college I was at. A lot of ice storms out there. I remember one time I was tailgated pretty brutally by somebody coming from one major city to another to where the university was. And at some point I was able to determine who this was. It was my physics professor. Physics. Physics involves momentum, inertia. If anybody should know what a 2,000-pound block of steel traveling on ice at high speed is capable, the havoc it can wreak, it should be a physics professor. And yet he was driving like a maniac. This person was stupid. But in other areas of their life, they were at least considered brilliant. So, I'm not trying to insult people when I say stupid, but I have to put that in there. Because when I point out why people are falling for this health scare, it comes down to stupidity. And again, I'm not trying to insult you, but if you don't learn how to make your brain function properly using rules of logic, thinking rationally, cleansing data before you process it, you don't just take whatever you hear on CNN and accept it as the truth. Oh, Donald Trump's a racist. Oh, really? Okay. Stick that in my head and there we go. Hey, Donald Trump's a racist. Could you provide me a piece of evidence of this? Well, no. Everybody knows he's a racist. I've gone over that before in other videos. The reason people are falling for this pandemic, this health scare, and there is a disease out there, and it is killing people, don't get me wrong. There is something going on there, but it is not the end of the world. It is not the bubonic plague. It is not the Spanish flu. Nothing of the kind. It's because people are not thinking properly. Let's go back to the Turing test. The Turing test is supposed to be somebody interacting with a computer, and the question is, can they tell that they're interacting with a computer, or do they think they're interacting with a human? Here's the trick. Since most people don't think very well, they don't think properly, they're stupid. Sorry, but that's what it is. Because of that, their interactions with other people are very dumbed down. They can talk about pop culture, they can talk about what's in the news headlines, they can talk about Justin Bieber and what happened to Kobe Bryant and all these things. They can do that, but once you start getting them talking about ideas, they just kind of start to crash and burn. And for me, thwarting the Turing test was pretty easy. You just have to get whatever it is you're conversing with to discuss something that's elevated above what the Joe average talks about over at the bar when they're drinking. And it's going to be pretty obvious whether you're talking to a computer or a human, right? So they've raised the bar at this point because for the most part they consider it that they passed the Turing test a long time ago. But they're passing the Turing test. Look at the way they're conducting the test. They're having people who really don't have a whole lot going on up here to begin with talking to a computer. Well, it's not that hard to program a computer to satisfy someone who, I mean, if the computer never brings up Plato's allegory of the cave, then this person's never gonna be stuck in a position where they're like, well, I don't know what that means, and they're gonna have to try to deal with it, and then the computer has to try to deal with that, and that's where it starts falling apart. In normal social situations, when you don't know what to do and you feel awkward, that's when things start to fall apart because you're cueing off of each other, and a computer can't do that because it's not a human. But if you're just going to chat, sit down, oh, how's the weather over there? Oh, it's pretty good. Yeah, it's nice out here too. They say it might rain tomorrow. You can make a computer say that without any problem at all. All right? So that's the first thing I wanted to point out was the Turing test and the fact that academia considers that some kind of a some kind of a goal for artificial intelligence is for a computer to be able to speak to somebody who really doesn't spend a lot of time thinking in the first place and fooling them into believing they're talking to a human. The fact is, most of the people these people talk to in their daily lives don't have a whole lot more going on than the computer itself. They don't have a better vocabulary. The computer probably has a much better vocabulary. They don't really know a whole lot more than what's been programmed into the computer to know. They don't read books. They just sit and stare at their phone or at the TV set their whole lives, and well, it's easy to pass the Turing test with that. And again, I'm sorry if that sounds insulting, but I'm here to tell you the truth. And yeah, the truth hurts. Now, the second thing I want to mention is something that I just alluded to a moment ago. It's called the allegory of the cave. It's one of the big staples of Western philosophy from Plato. The allegory of the cave, Plato was trying to explain the way that so many people, and the people he's talking about are the people I just talked about in the Turing test. The ones who are not interacting with the world. They don't learn. They go by rules of thumb. You're black, therefore you're inferior. They don't think, they don't process, they don't take data and cleanse it before they process it. That's what he's referring to, what someone might call the great masses. And what Plato was saying is that most people behave, they go through their entire lives as if they're sitting in a cave and they're facing the wall. And they interact with the world that they live in so little that throughout their whole lives they never even realize that there's something over to the right, something over to the left, something behind them, something above, something below. They're just staring there all the time. You might think of it as people staring at their phones. They're just staring at this box while this whole universe goes on around them. Now, Plato didn't know that the phones were coming. That's why the allegory of the cave is so important even today. Well, if that's your life, what are you going to see? The only thing you're going to see are shadows projected. The light coming into the cave is going to project whatever's going on in the real world behind you. It's going to project that onto the wall in front of you. And the only thing you're going to know in your entire life is what you're seeing here. Now, in some cases, you might see a shadow that seems to be bipedal, and it looks like it has a head and 2 arms and 2 legs and a torso. It generally has this kind of shape to it. Okay? And you interpret that as something like yourself. But what if the reality is that it's actually a bear standing on its hind legs? And you just think it's a person because the shadow generally resembles the shape of a person. Well, if that happens, that bear's going to come up behind you, and with one swipe, it's going to end your life. You see, you're at risk when you don't engage the world you live in, when you don't learn to think and to observe the world all around you, not just focusing on that or focusing on that. And that's what Plato was getting at, was that even back then, most of the people in society, what we call the masses, that's how they live their entire lives. Donald Trump's a racist. Okay, I'm going to grab that, stick it in my head, and now I believe it. I have no evidence for it. I can't back it up. I can't argue. I can't debate it. But I believe it because CNN told me so. Coronavirus is going to kill us all. Oh my gosh, we gotta social distance. Where's my mask? Where's my mask? Please, governor, take away my job, take away my ability to feed my family, make me stay at home, please. Meanwhile, there's a whole world out there where something else might be going on, other than the doom and gloom, the sky is falling, the world is ending scenario that other people are telling you. So I just wanted to mention those two things because they are very important when it comes to the way that a computer functions versus the way that humans function. Because in a way there's two types of humans. There are, and I hate to put it this way, I'm really sorry, but there's human animals. There's the people who are human, but they really don't use their humanity. They don't use their brain. They don't use their ability to think. They don't observe the world. They don't engage the world. They don't travel. They don't investigate. They're not curious. They have no intellectual curiosity. They're just staring at a phone. Or, oh, I got to do my hair. I mean, that's their whole life. They're just human animals. They're human beings, but they don't really do anything. And then there's the humans who are elevated above. And the problem is, when you get something like a cult of academia, whenever you have a cult, it automatically takes people and lowers them down toward that human animal status. Because the groupthink and everything is the exact opposite of what a free, independent, clear-headed thinker, how they're going to function. So when we get into the computer models in the next video, keep these things very much in mind. That a computer model, when it's trying to model anything that has to do with human beings, is it modeling the way people really work, or is it modeling some kind of a shadow boxing sideshow going on in front of the people who wrote the computer program who don't understand how the world works? Because if the people who are creating these computer models for the coronavirus or whatever else, if they're the kind of people who can't pass the Turing test themselves, or if they're the kind of people who Plato was talking about with the allegory of the cave, and the sad fact is, they are, for the most part. Remember, academia is a cult, and cults dumb people down by definition. They reduce you to the lowest common denominator within that cult. That's the problem with these computer models. I hope all that made sense. I don't want to dwell on it too much right here, but I realized I needed to add these two things. So let me get back to the end of the video. But I tell you what, I'm going to end up with a specific example in this one. I have to do a little bit of work first, so I'll turn off the camera and turn it back on. But basically, let's go back to this little guy. This little model, or little guitar. I hope even if you don't play guitar, you get the sense that this thing is a joke. A piece of junk. Something from the dollar store, right? What I'm going to do is, when I come back, I'm going to have a real guitar, and I'm going to show you what computers are really capable of in terms of modeling the things that you need to play a guitar. Specifically, when you play electric, this is an acoustic. It makes the sound through the sound hole. But when you have an electric guitar, you play it, and these electric pickups turn the sound into electricity. They go through a wire, and they go to an amplifier, like the one in your car, and it amplifies the sound. That's where you get the, the heavy guitar sound. You can use computers to model those devices that exist in the real world. And as it turns out, they do modeling of something in the real world probably better than just about anything out there that I'm aware of. They're fantastic at it. And I want to show it to you in this video first, because I'm going to tear it apart in the next one to show you why the great, enormous, tremendous, undeniable success of what they call guitar modeling software has zero relevance to the models that are being used for things like coronavirus. They're two entirely, completely different, fundamentally different things. So let me hang up the phone here. I'll be back when I get the guitar all set up so I can show you what I mean by that, all right?
Bar of soap is crazy.